All right, welcome everybody for joining us. I think people are still gathering in the room, but I'd like to start with a brief introduction. I'm Fan Dai with the California China Climate Institute. I'm very delightful to be here with you today and moderate the discussion this morning, this evening, wherever you are. Before we actually get started, just a few very quick housekeeping notes here. The event today is being simultaneously translated into Mandarin Chinese. So if you would like to use the translation function, you can select the language you would like to hear using the global icon at the base of your screen of the Zoom window. And this discussion is being recorded. It will be available later on our Institute's website and the YouTube channels. Throughout our discussion today, if you would like to direct any questions to the speakers, please feel free to use the Q&A function also on your screen at the time during the webinar. We will do our best to answer as many of the questions you might have live. So today's topic is about China's latest climate policy updates. We know that in recent years, China had made a number of announcements about its climate policy and targets, including emission peaking by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060 as some of the major targets among those. It has now issued policies to implement these goals in practice, including a mid-century long-term strategy and policy guidance and action plans on carbon peaking. So today, we're very glad to hear from issue experts to offer their insights and analysis on the latest updates of China's climate policy. So let me first introduce the speakers today. Professor Zhou Ji, who is the CEO of Energy Foundation China. And Professor Zhou has years of experiences in economics, energy, environment, climate change, and policy making. He is highly regarded in the climate and clean energy space, not just in China. He previously served as the Deputy Director General of China's National Center for Climate Change Strategy and International Cooperation, focusing on China's low carbon development strategy and policy. He also led international climate negotiations and collaboration in China. Between 2012 and 2015, and between 2000 and 2009, Professor Zhou was a key member of the Chinese climate negotiation team leading up to Paris Agreement, which has promoted China's new role in the global climate governance. And previously, Professor Zhou also served as the Vice Dean, Professor, and Doctoral Supervisor at the School of Environment and Natural Resources at Renmin University in Beijing. And second, we have Dr. Fuqiang Yang, who is Senior Advisor on Climate Change and Energy Transition program at the Institute of Energy at Peking University. Dr. Yang has worked on China's sustainable energy strategy and policy for more than 4 decades and has extensive research experience in energy savings in building, industrial, and transportation sectors, low carbon cities, electricity, and renewable energy, all the aspects that you can think of about China's policy, climate policy. Prior to joining Peking University, Dr. Yang was Senior Advisor on Energy, Environment, and Climate Change at the Natural Resources Defense Council, who was also Director of Global Climate Solutions at WWF's international headquarters and Vice President of Energy Foundation. And we also have Dr. Joanna Luis, who is the Distinguished Associate Professor of Energy and Environment and Director of the Science, Technology, and International Affairs Program at Georgetown University School of Foreign Services. Professor Luis has 2 decades of experience working on international climate and clean energy policy with a focus on China, who is also a long-term friend with the Institute. At Georgetown, she runs an active externally funded research program and leads several dialogues and joint study groups facilitating US-China climate change engagement. She is the author of the award-winning book, Green Innovation in China, and was a lead author of international panel on climate change's fifth assessment report. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to the Professor Zhou Ji first to offer his remarks and updates on China's climate policy. Professor Zhou, please.
Okay, thank you, Stefan, and thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So very pleased to be invited to be here to introduce to the latest progress in Chinese climate policy. So could somebody help me to share the slides? But anyway, I will.
Yeah, we can share the slides for you.
Okay. I think Jianan should be the one. Otherwise, or Daifan, or
yeah, I think we can give Jana. We can add Jana as co-host so she can play the slides for you, or we can do it from here.
Okay. But while we wait for sharing the slides, I would say, oh, okay, it's coming. Thank you. So I would deliver this briefing with three elements. The first one is dynamics of China national climate policy, followed by China local deployment, and also prioritize the opportunity for US-China subnational level. Next slide, please. So let's look at the background. So as you know, those years, especially since the last quarter, I mean, China had been faced with very high risk of economic stagflation. So given the growth rate lower than the expectation, and also you can see the PMI is less than 50%. So those essentially show China is faced with slowdown of the economy. But in the meanwhile, given the international and the domestic circumstances, especially the QE policy to rescue the economy by major economies, including U.S. Federal Reserve and also other major economies. And I would say, I mean, at least 2 years ago, this had been implemented, and then through the import of large group of commodities, including oil and gas, as well as mineral products. So these might be a channel to import the international inflation. And in the meanwhile, especially recently, Chinese central bank also applying relatively easier, QE, and together with the fiscal policy, to stimulate the economy. And the two, one driver is for inflation, another driver is from slowdown of the economy. So I would warn, the risk of stagflation will might happen. So this is the mainstream policy agenda and the risk. And no need to say, after the war, Ukraine Russia war, energy security concern becomes a rising concern. That means in terms of policy agenda, I mean, the weight of these considerations become higher and higher, even in the top position. And in these circumstances, there has been a debate how to ensure the energy security. So, and then we have two directions for the policy development. One direction is, oh, let's come back to coal. As you know, China has rich storage of coal, and coal accounts for over 57% of the primary energy. And the other direction is, oh, let's accelerate the development of renewable or other non-fossil fuel, and in that way, we can be less reliant. We can rely on oil and gas less and less. But for the moment, if you look, we look at the performance of energy restructuring and as well as emission. So you can see that from the figures in this slide. On one hand, we see the share of renewable in the total energy, I mean power generation. We saw some progresses. I mean the share becomes higher and higher over time. But on the other hand, we also saw a rebound of emission, and unfortunately, the coal total amount of coal use came back to the equally high in the history. I mean, to the historic peak, that's 4.2 billion, 4.2 gigatons. So, having said that, maybe the audience would feel confused. Oh, why? Well, on one hand, China made its pledge for carbon neutrality for Peking and take some action already. But on the other hand, we saw the emission become higher and higher. So those are some questions in front of us. Next slide, please. And then we saw now it's in a very critical moment. I mean, to synergize different policy objectives, including growth, energy security, and the climate. So that means we saw well, we just mentioned the challenges, and on the other hand, we also saw the big opportunity to put all the objectives together and to achieve them in one policy choices. So that means so we have seen as a matter of rescuing the economy, and the Chinese government has decided to advance infrastructure projects, including energy transportation, high tech, etc., etc. But we saw it's very mixed. So the additional investment flowed into not only renewable energy efficiency digital field, but also to clean coal. So I mean, according to the media release, we saw 300 billion renminbi yuan So that's about 50 billion US dollars. So they have been allocated as a re-loan from the central bank into the coal area. So again, it's very mixed. But as a matter of documents for policy, so it has been very well known. I mean, for the 1+N policy system, climate policy system. So that means the one is the overarching guideline for everything. I mean, from restructuring energy, energy transformation. I mean, towards high share of renewable, and also including sectoral policy guidelines. Covering power, transport, industry, building, etc., and also regional development. So, within this framework, the council has launched a guideline for unified national energy market, and the National Energy and Nutrition Day has indicated that no new coal power project for baseload power generation only. And besides, we are still underway for developing sectoral and thematic 14 5-year plan, including the 14 5-year plan for modern energy system. These have been launched already. So, if you look at the real impacts of those policies, we have seen, with the mix of different policy objectives, mainly driven by rescuing the economy. We have seen in the efforts to enlarge investment to support GDP growth rate, renewable investment was over 137 billion US dollars in last year, and I would assume this year will at least maintain that pace and even larger. These should be increased as a main driver for economic growth and also contribute to the power system decarbonization. Next slide, please. And then let's have a very quick look at local government, because China, just as US, China is so large economy, and also geographically, it's very uneven from north to south, from west to east. That means we should consider further how to deploy and implement the national pledge or national policies at local level. And the local government and the local stakeholders, they are faced with the day-to-day challenges and opportunity for local fiscal revenue, for local development, for everything. So this is a little bit different from the situation national government and the national stakeholders faced with in the routine life and activity. So this slide just show one, we implement so-called dual carbon goal. That means the earlier peaking goal and the carbon neutrality goal in short term and the longer term. So we will see a very interesting feature at local level. For the moment, although we see very little, very seldom, very ambitious targets, as a commitment by local government or local stakeholders, but the local policy profile are very diversified, including energy transition, climate plus air quality, coal management, tax, MRV, etc. And the different cities and the provinces, they have different priorities, different initiatives, very diversified. But the fact is, local government, waiting the guidance from the national government, they are taking some action, but in a very uneven manners. When we go to local domain, we will see relatively complicated situation because of the uneven development level. So when you go to Beijing, Shanghai, or Shenzhen, or Hangzhou, Suzhou, those coastal area or eastern part, so they are simply developed economies with much higher GDP per capita. But if you go to the middle China and western China, the income level is relatively low, and a lot of very initial development challenges were there. With a lot of rural population and quite low income level. So, and then they have different economic agenda and different resources, the endowment, and then different policy and plan. Okay, next slide, please. These slides show Energy Foundation China. In the past years, we have made some efforts to go to local to deploy our project for carbon peaking and neutrality. And essentially, in fact, we haven't finished the deployment, but these show the general design and the progress in international NGO efforts at local level. So from north to south, we saw, in Mongolia, the shadow, the north shadow. So in Mongolia, this is the top 1 or top 2 coal producer. But in the meanwhile, it also has a very huge potential to develop renewable, solar and wind power. So it's a very good place to see how to make energy transition happen in those provinces. And the western one is the Qinghai province. It's in a high land and had a rich renewable, including the hybrid of solar, wind, and hydropower. And now Qinghai to Zhumadian city, there has been a high voltage transmission grid in place already to transmit the rich renewable from Qinghai province to eastern part. The more intensive energy use center. And then we saw down to north, we saw Jingjinji, around Beijing, Tianjin, and this is another center for energy use load. And down to Yangtze River Delta region, Shanghai, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, etc. And this is another economic center and one of the most developed region with the intensive population and energy use there. I mean, in the northern China, we work with Guangdong province and the Shenzhen municipality as well as Hainan Island. So those account for over 40% of GDP, Chinese GDP, 38% of carbon dioxide emission, and 30% of population in China. And we will continue to deploy our local deployment, local implementation with the holistic design to do local capacity building, local design of policies and action plan, as well as the pilot in specific thematic area. Next slide, please. And finally, let's look at the prioritized cooperation opportunities between China and the US for subnational level. Next slide, please. So as you know, in Glasgow last year, China and the US had reached a joint declaration, and these include subnational cooperation and as well as other focal areas for cooperation. And I would say subnational cooperation might be a major pillar for China and the US cooperation. As you may know, recently, fortunately, led by Secretary John Kerry and the Minister Xi Zhenhua, the China and the US, the two teams had reached an agreement to make progress. To move forward for the joint working group of China and the US on climate change, with four focal areas, including energy, transmission, subnational cooperation, methane initiative, as well as circular economy. So the good news is the subnational has been officially determined by the two governments. For the first round cooperation, and then I think we, especially with the California colleagues, we should think more and quickly how to make subnational cooperation in place and make some tangible progress as soon as possible. Even I would expect this cooperation will drive the overall climate cooperation between China and the US. And another good news is California has signed an MOU with China Ministry of Ecology and the Environment recently, including climate cooperation. So those have built up a political basis for the more programmatic cooperation between China and the US at subnational level. Next slide, please. And this showed some advantages, or I would say comparative advantages in California. To play a big role for China-US subnational cooperation. No need to say, as a matter of size of the economy, California is the top 5 economy in the world, and with its very amazing capacity for R&D, especially in ICT area. Digitalization of the economy of specific sector will be one major measure to reduce emission by improving efficiency. in many sectors. So I think California can make amazing contribution, not only to California itself, but also to China and the whole world. So this is a very strong comparative advantage for California. And no need to say, we have identified several focal areas for immediate cooperation. Number one, EV, electric vehicle. California is I would say, is the cradle to develop that technology and that industry in terms of R&D and the manufacture. But in the meanwhile, China is the largest market and also has a stronger capacity in only for Beijing municipality where I live. Within 4 years, by 2025, the target is for the storage for the stock of the vehicle, there will be 2 million electric vehicle in this specific city. But for the whole national, it had been estimated, to reach over 30 million. So this is a feeling of the size of the market. I just dreamed if California, together with other states of the United States, can have a sort of the combination of cooperation. Technology, R&D, capital, and together with the size of the market and also manufacturing, these will be a fantastic cooperation, and with the further investment, with the financial revenue, as well as the development of the technology. I would assume this will make the cost of the technology declining very quickly in the coming 5 or 10 years, and this will change the whole automobile market and industry in the whole world. So I do believe this is a very important area for California and China to cooperate. But for China, as you know, Tesla had opened a factory in Shanghai, one of the major market, Yangtze River Delta areas, and so for the moment, everywhere, even in Beijing, you saw a lot of Tesla electric vehicle in the street, and no need to say in Shenzhen, together with some Chinese brand of electric vehicle, we saw there is a convergence of this kind of transport. This will change the whole automobile history. Oh, next slide, please. And we also saw another comparative advantage from California, and this fit Chinese market and the Chinese huge transition of the economy. So that's renewable. So I have no time to go to details, but you see the change of California's energy share, energy mix, and also it's a very ambitious target to reach 100% renewable in its power system by 2045. And China also is on the way to move towards to renewable. And the final prioritized focal area is a coordinated governance of air and the climate pollutants. In fact, in the past year, we have a lot of dialogues, to see how to manage the normal emitters, normal pollutants, including particulates and, for example, PM 2.5 or NOx or sulfur dioxide and ozone, and together with carbon dioxide emission, I think the experience to manage that simultaneously in California is very, very valuable in major cities and the provinces in China. I know Beijing municipality had a regular dialogue with Air Quality Resource Commission and the other experts from California. And I do believe these dialogues should continue and then go deeper and reach some outcome for policy change. Okay, I think I should stop here. So any question and comments? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Professor Zhou. That was a really comprehensive introduction about China, some of those most important policy updates. I do see a question here in the Q&A, but maybe we'll save it for now, and we'll ask Fu Qiang Laoshi to present his insights and updates, and then Joanna, and we'll go to the Q&A at the end. So Fu Qiang Laoshi, please.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. 下面呢，我就用中文来说吧。也许这个可以把一些事情说得很清楚。周记老师呢，做了一个非常全面的关于中国目前的这个政策的发展，同时呢，也强调中美两国之间要加强联系。这一点呢，我是非常的支持的。我认为现在中美两国政府间的这种对话和联系呢，正在减少。所以在民间的团体之间的交流呢，就显得非常重要。所以今天的会呢，我觉得开得很好，而且也希望今后呢，多开，加强我们民间之间的交流。因为中美两国对气候变化，对世界能源安全，负有不可推卸的责任。下面呢，我们来看一下这个最近的政策发展。习近平主席呢，最近呢发表了一篇文章，那么关于气候变化和能源的问题呢，这里面习近平讲了，就是3060的目标，就是2060年达到碳中和的目标是坚定不移的，也就是说这个目标也不会改变，也一定会实现。习近平主席又讲呢，这个实现这个目标呢，他也要稳步前进，这个逐步实现的。我觉得这个呢，就是把当前有些人认为我们这个目标是不是很难实现不了，把这种怀疑呢，给予一些很明确的政府信号。因为中国在3060呢制定的目标，对于我们搞政策研究来讲，觉得非常清晰，对每一个阶段2025、2030、2035、2050、2060都制定了非常详细的规划，可再生能源要发展多少，还有一些政府的支持，一些什么样的政策要有多少。当然这里头对化石能源没有做比较详细的规定，这里面呢就是因为未来呢很多不确定性，所以下面呢我们还可以再谈到这一点。所以整个3060年的目标呢，现在对我们来讲，这个是肯定能实现，不是能不能实现的问题，是能不能提早更全面更好的来实现这个目标。 所以在对我们政策研究来讲，这一点是很清楚的。第二呢，就是有了这个政府目标呢，刚才周记老师呢，也讲到各个部门、各个地方都在制定自己的目标所以在这里面呢，就是中国政府一个很重要的就是1+N后面比如说包括财政、包括金融包括一些技术一些投资都在后面呢，都会一步一步显示出来。现在政府又提出要加快制定各个行业的有关的规划和政策，这个也很快出来现在就是钢铁、水泥这个也都很明确了，钢铁、水泥它的产量、产能是要严格控制的所以我们期望呢就是在钢铁、水泥这里的煤耗呢不会增长很快甚至会下降但是呢，煤化工这个发展呢现在受到了挑战。煤化工到底怎么发展，也值得我们来深思。所以在这个地方呢，也要制定更好的政策。也就是说，根据地方的政策呢，中央政府也不是说希望大家不顾地方的政策呢，就要搞得很快但是呢，你不能停止前进所以要稳扎稳打、稳步前进，来实现各个目标所以我觉得呢，这个政府呢再一次强调要完善统计政策，尤其是碳排放这个明确提出来所以可以看到呢，这几年呢，政府会投入很大的精力和资源来使我们的政策更加的清晰、更加的准确现在大家也在制定政策的时候也发现我们的数据呢还不是说很全面很可靠这个数据也要加强。所以从这里面呢我们可以看出来政府在补我们的短板看看有哪些长板。长板呢，就是政府制定的政策呢这个基本上是可以实现除了我学习以外，当然周记老师也在这里除了前几年的这个环境目标就是说2020年左右一些环境目标没有达到，其他的目标都达到但是在这个“425”以后“435”、“445”环境的目标也都超额完成所以这个事情呢中国的政府制定的目标呢我想这个国际社会不要过于去解读它这完成是肯定的。那么现在呢就有一些问题。那么中国从表面政府的政策呢看起来人们说你现在是不是后退了是不是有怎么样呢我想用一个这个走路的来理解我们走路的是一左一右就前后一脚，你不可能一直左也不可能一直右，那就偏离了方向，也走不了多远。当你在行进的过程中呢碰到水沟，要么跳过去，碰到障碍物，要么你就爬过去或者绕过去，有时候呢还要后退1-2步所以我们中国很熟悉我们一个舞蹈叫做这个秧歌舞就是左一步右一步，前进2步后退1步，但是呢总是稳步的前进所以我们对这个政策呢应该加以理解美国的政策也是这样的他总不会说对原来的政策要做一些补充也修改一些修正所以在这里面呢为什么中国现在把能源的安全作为很重要的目标呢就是现在俄乌战争还有美国政府目前改变了对中国一些总的方略、总的方针所引起来的中国在这里面呢因为它的体量也比较大这个也依靠本身的资源因为中国对外的依存度呢现在美国是能源独立中国呢 反而取代了美国在这个安全问题上呢变得特别突出煤还有进口1年进口3亿吨，相当一个大国的煤炭消费量，进口石油呢这个依存度占了72%左右，天然气也是占47%。大家想一想，要是一下这么多的石油、煤炭，天然气不行的话，所以中国政府呢，目前就把安全呢放在一个很重要的地位。那么这里面呢就有个问题，就是煤电怎么做，煤炭怎么做所以煤炭呢现在正在加强储备，万一石油、天然气这个进口受到了阻碍，中国最起码有油如果其他的能源被切断，中国最起码最主要的电力能够保证供应所以这个呢是从安全的策略来考虑的这对中国来讲也是没有办法的事情就是在2000年左右，中美之间的那种非常好的关系呢现在已经看不到了，所以这是一个中国政府制定政策一个很重要的考量所以煤电呢，我估计呢，在2025年之间呢恐怕还会有增长估计是会增长1亿千瓦，现在差不多11亿会增加到12亿多一点，但是呢，不是主要，刚才周记讲，不是作为主要的这个基础的这个煤电来供应，但是在有些地区，特别是中部地区江西、湖南、湖北这个电力呢供应还是有问题还有一些地方呢还要这个能源改造还要这个3个改造：能源改造、环境的改造有些不好的这个非常落后的也要淘汰，同时呢把煤电呢搞成这个我们叫做 flexible 这个电源所以在这里面呢就是煤电，但是我要跟大家说，容量是增加了，但是煤耗不见得会增加不见得成比例的增加，煤耗还会因为你很多大的这个高效的机组还有增加这个改造所以煤耗呢估计呢会增加到差不多14.7亿吨左右就是不是成比例，恐怕会增加几个百分点所以对这个煤电呢，大家也要这个很好的考虑。另外呢，中国这个加强新基建这个投资呢这个也是非常多的这个新基建当然包括可再生能源包括这个5G包括这个数字信息化技术等等这个呢跟其他的国家来比呢我觉得中国在这个方面可以做得很好，所以希望这些事情呢，新的基建、新的数字化跟我们老的能源企业能源领域结合起来，它毕竟发生变化，尤其是对节能尤其是对可再生能源会发生非常大的变化。那么这一点呢，很多国家也看不清楚，过几年你就可以显现出来我们的这个尤其是我们的汽车行业汽车行业现在不是说你是不是电动车的问题是你和互联网的问题。将来这个电动车的发展中国已经开始走不是走说强调电动车了，要各种技术政策的支持，是互联网整个这个联网的问题，就会把电动车呢变成一个不是开车的一个一个汽车了所以我们对这个问题呢要很认真的看清楚在这个情况下呢，加强中国的基建呢变成是一个首要任务。当然，中国对国际上的一些这个支持呢，中国的这个碳的目标也没有改变所以在这个问题上呢这个如果大家还有什么问题呢我也很高兴回答。好，谢谢。
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Yang. And yeah, for the audience, if you have any question, feel free to put in the Q&A box and we'll try to answer them at the end. Now I'd like to shift over to Joanna Luis. I know both Professor Zhou Ji and Professor Fu Qiang are based in China. So it will be really interesting to hear from you, Joanna, your view from outside of China, how you see those policy change and developments. Over to you, Joanna.
Great, thank you so much, Fan, and it's a pleasure to participate in this panel tonight with such distinguished experts and longtime colleagues. It's great to see everyone. I wanted to start with some brief reactions to some of the broader developments in Chinese climate and energy policy that we've been hearing about, and then speak a bit to the status of Track 1 of sort of formal US-China climate cooperation activities. Generally, of course, has been mentioned, we are seeing increasing emissions from China due to this resurgence in coal. We saw the beginnings of this resurgence right before Glasgow, actually, driven by these short-term electricity shortages that the country was experiencing last year, and many coal mines were ordered to maximize operations. We now know that last year China had its largest ever levels of total energy consumption and total coal consumption at the highest annual growth rate that we've seen in over a decade. And of course, now we're seeing an economy hit by supply chain and zero COVID policy disruptions. And so the government has set a goal to boost coal production another 300 million tons this year, 7% over last year's output. So, while we saw a slow in coal use last month, for example, this will likely be countered by further stimulus measures to meet this goal. Of course, energy security concerns are certainly understandable given the state of the world that we all live in today. But as we know, there are other options, and this return to coal is, of course, a major concern for China's ability to meet current climate targets, and certainly its ability to increase the ambition of these targets. And I hope this is what Fu Qiang called this sort of step forward, backward, and sideways policy, and that soon we'll be able to return to a step forward in this area. I think we've also seen some growing pains in climate policy implementation, namely with the emissions trading scheme. Of course, China's ETS launched initially in 2017, but really began operating last year, covering the power sector, with a plan to originally expand to cover 8 sectors over time. But we're seeing, a delay in implementation beyond the power sector. There's, as has been mentioned, the MEE sent some officials, to conduct spot inspections of facilities at the local level earlier this year, and random inspections found a huge number of power companies had submitted problematic data. One report I saw, sort of 18 out of 19 of the plants inspected, they found flaws in the emissions, reported. And this is of course to be expected. We knew there were going to be a lot of challenges with trying to to really track this emissions data well when this was rolled out relatively quickly. But because of this, we see the delay in the rollout of coverage to industrial sectors and ongoing issues, with data verification. So I think these are all areas where, certainly there's a lot of work I know being done to try to improve. Turning to US-China cooperation, since Glasgow, of course, we saw the joint declaration announced there between both of our countries. But of course, overall, from where I sit in Washington, relations are not great between our countries right now. I think it's, the pandemic is, of course, ongoing. But despite that, most diplomatic work has continued around the world and has really restarted. But of course, China remains still very closed off, is not allowing official visits in the same way that other countries are, even with public health safeguards in place. And also just we see very minimal travel of Chinese scholars outside the country, minimal participation in meetings, conferences, et cetera, which just makes it very difficult to keep up relations, share information, which I think is so critically important. But of course, work on climate change is continuing despite these challenges, but we are really in a very different mode of engagement than we were in past years. Gone are the days of where there was a high-level forum every week and a signing ceremony. And, I think now we really see engagement focused on specific actions and mostly closed discussions. And as I understand it, the US team in Climate Envoy, Kerry's office is primarily focused on implementing the 3 key elements of the joint declaration, namely accelerating coal phase down, methane, particularly the development of China's National Action Plan on methane, which is set to be released later this year. And then also working on deforestation and enhancing deforestation laws and import restrictions for illegal harvested timber. So, this is, of course, the pivotal decade for really shifting emissions trajectories and climate action from China and the United States. This decade is extremely important for the planet. So, I think it is a goal of the US to work with China to raise ambition in its NDC before 2030, potentially include some of the new methane targets, which may be put forward this year in the context of the International Climate Pledge in the NDC, and, use these sort of increased ambitions to get on a path of CO2 emissions decline. And just briefly on the methane point, I think given the challenges we're seeing with coal, methane really is an area where we are seeing constructive developments, both in the United States and China in terms of policy progress, and where both countries really have similar issues to work on, particularly surrounding the monitoring and measurement practices related to methane emissions. And methane, currently accounts for, about 0.5 degree Celsius of global warming. China alone producing 1.5 gigatons approximately of methane emissions annually. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to work in this space. And I think it's important to keep the cooperation going and the information flowing so that we can continue to cooperate in this area. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. That is a really good insight from you. So I think Professor Zogby just answered the one question in Q&A, which is about the coal expansion. And I think all of you have, in your remarks, touched upon this issue. I wanted to bring up a question, which I think we also touched a bit on, as Professor Fu Qiang was saying, China's this sort of approach of walking forward and backwards and sideways. But he's, in his remarks, he said it's very confident that China will be able to achieve this long-term goal. I wanted to bring the timeline a little bit back to the near term, because we know for the Glasgow Joint Declaration, it was pretty much focused on the 2020s, right? So it's a near-term focused joint declaration. And we also know recently there have been several kind of studies laid out that China, basically suggesting China could peak its emission before the target year of 2030. I want to know, in your view, this is a question to all of you, do you think that China it's possible or will be able to achieve this ahead of the 2030 timeline? And if so, what are the main reasons, and if not, how what's your opinion about China not able to meeting that ahead of 2030? Maybe we'll start with Professor Zouji.
Okay, thank you. Very challenging question. And certainly this is a very crucial question. But I described in the official language, it should be before 2030. But with several research outputs, the latest one is a report produced by Chinese Academy of Engineering. They believe the peaking year should be 27. And Energy Foundation China, we also did some analysis last year, but with different methodologies. We try to find the peaking years from the angle of economic development, rather than only to look at the quantitative trajectory. I mean, from the past to the future. And in short, it's a matter of Kuhn's curve. And we did the provincial level analysis, and the conclusion is, for the moment, about 40% of the emission, national emission, I mean, in some provinces, had reached the peak already. And then another 40% is very close to peaking the plateau. And if we will have another 5 years, that means that by the end of 2025, it's very likely for 80% of the overall emission can reach peak or to peak status, including the plateau period. But we didn't answer the question how long the plateau period will be. But anyway, our definition of peaking is if you reach the plateau, that peak might be a period. It might be 3 years, 5 years, or even 10 years. But anyway, so those are our funding. But certainly with some condition, that means the Chinese growth rate should maintain stable around 5 to 6%. But out of our expectation, we saw two interventions there since last year. Number one, energy security concern. I mean, by the international inflation, and also together with the Ukraine war, and directly this will lead to impacts on gas and oil. But so with the economics concept, coal is subsidy, is how to say, is some replacement of coal and oil. And then the coal price can also be ready. So this is one interaction. And another interaction is the slowdown of the economy, and the growth rate becomes lower than our expectation because of COVID-19 and other intervention. And that side, we would say, in fact, the real how we justify, I mean, how to make a judgment of peaking year. In fact, it's not only the matter of timing, but also the matter of income level. I mean, different income level will have a corresponding economic structure, corresponding growth driver. And then this leads to the shape of the trajectory. And then let's interpret the income level change, I mean growth rate, into years or timing. and then you can see when the timing. So to be short, the expected income level should be around the 14 to 15,000 US dollars per capita. So that means just look at China's growth rate trajectory. When China will reach this income level, when that's the year China should reach the peak. So there will be a little bit more uncertainty for the moment, but absolutely, I would believe if everything's okay, if we recover from the COVID quickly, and then it should be significantly before 2030. I mean, between 2025 and 2030. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Zhou. Thanks for laying that out from the kind of economic perspective, but also pointing out a few kind of uncertainty and influencing factors here. I wonder, Fu Chang 老师, what is your opinion and your view on this meeting peaking target year?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think is based on our study and the information we gathered, and that's probably is around 2025. China will probably reach the CO2 emission peak. Only a couple sector based on their study is the latest to reach their peak in this sector. That's including the petrochemical, coal chemical, and also building. So building may probably is before the 2030, and the petrochemical and the coal chemical sector probably is around the 2030. So generally speaking, so that is for sure. And for the local, so far I didn't find any promises. Government, they say they will get a peak after 2030. No, I don't think so. So that is a way. But another way is we think is now China use more coal. So if answer your question about the coal, the CO2 emission cap, and now they use much more, but that is a push and the coal peak and oil peak, earlier. So generally speaking, we can reach, because after 5 or 6 years, do you think China will continue to use the coal? Because most in the energy intensive sector, is okay, now get a plateau or is a decline. So these 5 years maybe other fossil fuel will reach the peak. This is the answer, can answer your question, because they cannot use anymore after a couple years. For instance, last year, the coal increased 4.6%. The CO2 emission increased 4%. Do you think China will still increase the 4% every year for CO2 emission? I don't think so. So in this case, is a peak. We, definitely we can reach, but peak will be higher than we expected before. So that is okay to answer your question. We can reach the peak before the 2030. But another question is maybe bring the problem and questions to later on, and we have to put more resources and to get 2060 the carbon neutrality. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Fu Chang 老师. Very interesting perspective, and pointing out the level of emissions when we actually peak. Joanna, what is your view on this question?
I'm not going to try to make a prediction, but I too would just point to the modeling studies. I mean, your institute put out a very nice summary of all of the mid-century studies that have been done in the last few years, written by my colleagues at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. And I think we see a range in peak year anywhere from 2025 to 2030, depending on your assumptions. And, I think the current period we're in right now is challenging a lot of the assumptions, even in the most aggressive scenarios. But I do think what is also just really important, right, is that if you look at the carbon emissions levels at 2030 across all these models, there is just a huge range in what the carbon emissions will be when they peak, right? And others have alluded to this. But we're looking at a range of models by many of the leading research institutes that show that the levels could be twice what they would be to get to a 1.5 degrees Celsius compatible global goal, right? So I think it is important to focus on the peak year and moving up the peak year, and I know that's what a lot of policy discussions have been focused on. But I think even more important is what is the trajectory, what is happening with coal. I think as Fuchang mentioned, I mean, many of the trends we're seeing in some of the heavy industrial sectors, again, are potentially promising, but some of the stimulus measures being put in place that just kind of go against all the natural market trends are concerning, and again, hopefully short term, as has been indicated.
Got it. Thanks, Joanna. In light of time, maybe just allow me to ask the last question, and seeking your brief answer. I'd like to bring this back to the US-China in the context of US-China climate coordination. What is your view or your recommendation? I think I really like the slides Professor Zhou laid out of subnational collaboration and what California especially could do. But in overall, recognizing the challenges in the bilateral relations, and also domestic challenges, as we were talking about today, right? The energy security side and COVID recovery, all that. What would you think in the near future, the US and China, as outlined in Glasgow Declaration, there are certain areas. Any recommendations that you would like to give to folks maybe in DC and in Beijing, and are actually driving those collaboration both on track one, and folks at subnational level are kind of implementing the actual policies? Any recommendations you have for kind of advancing such US-China climate collaboration or coordination in the near future, for areas that we could pay more attention to? Starting from, maybe this time we're starting from Joanna, and we then Fuchang Laoshi and Zhouji Laoshi to wrap up.
Sure. I think that, as I mentioned in my remarks, I think the joint statement laid out a lot of the really important areas for engagement. But I think, the challenge is, like, we know what needs to be done, and we sort of know where we have areas of common interest and common challenges when it comes to addressing climate change. And we've known this for a long time, have been working together for a long time. I think the most important thing is in this, just, I really want to emphasize, this is such a challenging time to be cooperating and engaging, given the challenges that both of our countries are facing. And I do think it's very damaging that there, are not the sort of regular exchanges taking place that we are all used to, the back and forth, because I think ultimately to build trust and understanding, it's just so important to have this sort of this flow of information and transparency. And I think that has, been one of the real problems that came out of the pandemic. Of course, climate, has in many ways, it's one area where we are working together, but not nearly at the levels that we have in the past. And yes, we have political and differences, but I still think this is an area where both governments have given a green light for continued engagement. So I just hope that we can keep these conversations happening and continue to focus on these important issues from coal to methane and beyond.
Thanks, Joanna. Yeah, we do hope that we have more of those dialogues, especially now things started opening up more in-person opportunities too. Fu Qiang 老师.
Yeah, I am not expert on the international affairs, but I would like to say something. So in the climate change and including methane and environment issues, I do believe two countries, well, whatever is the government side or civil societies, they can work together because they find a common interest in this area. And no government like to shut down, restore. So that is the base, the attitude and the work. But unfortunately, because other issues have a very strong impact on this. So so for our society, I think we have to get it together and have a more communication, exchange information, and to improve our relationship between two countries that get to the normal. If get better than the relationship, like 2000, I don't think so. But we have to get to the normal, and so not go to worse. And on particularly for us, I think is we have to promote and cooperate much better than before on the climate change issues and the environment issue. I think that's why. For the energy issue, particularly is for the energy security. Chinese government is more concerned about the oil and natural gas imported from outside country. So China have no way and have no any capability to interrupt, this kind of transportation and shipping. But US did. US they can have this capability. So for the energy issues, the energy security is both concern. And so I think is except this security, so other issues we still think is good for renewables, energy efficiency, definitely is our common interest. And so that now let's work more time, more resources on this area. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Fu Qiang 老师. Professor Zhou, you're
okay, thank you. Thank you. I fully agree with what my two colleagues here previously to say. But furthermore, I want to add another inconvenient element to talk about the China-US climate cooperation. That's a geopolitical relation. No need to say this is the fact, this is the reality. But my feeling is the poor geopolitical relation spillover effects on climate cooperation with lower and lower trust level. So that's a real challenge we should face, we should address. So that said, I mean, for politicians in the two countries, they should consider, to manage and control the disputes, the debate, the political dispute and the debates. Take into account the climate elements into the general political and the diplomatic relation. So to elevate the priority of climate issue in the two countries and also in the whole world, and to ensure adequate and efficient and effective cooperation. They should control the level of the trust in political perspective. That means to avoid going too far. For a poor political and diplomatic relation, these will lead to real negative impacts on climate and economic cooperation. This is my first comment. The second comment is we should try mainstream climate cooperation into the economic and the trade cooperation. After all, if we do want to change the emission trajectory, we should make the restructuring and the transformation of our economy sector by sector, product by product, technology by technology. And that's related to investment, consumption, and the trade. I would say if we want to make earlier picking and accelerate the pace to carbon neutrality. By the way, I know US Biden administration has launched a very ambitious target to make US power sector zero emission by 2035. And if we do want to achieve those ambitious targets, we should cooperate. And the cooperate is not only the matter of joint declaration, or talk, or track 1, track 1.5, track 2 dialogue, but also the real significant cooperative action. I mean, including sharing the knowledge, the better practice, the lesson learned, policy experience, as well as technology transfer, investment, and financial cooperation. If those can happen, I would say this will largely accelerate the progress in not only in US and China, but certainly those are top 1 and the top 2 emitter and the economy, but also the whole world. So this is extremely important. So having said that, I do believe we should integrate climate objective and the climate concern into the mainstream fiscal policy, the financial policy, trade policy. So those are my 2 major comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zhou. I just add a quick comment here. I do think it's a really good point that you made that we should think about incorporate climate and even prioritize that in a larger agenda, not just in the kind of foreign relations, international relations perspective, but also domestically, how we could bring this up on top of the larger agenda on the policy side. This is really helpful. Again, sorry for running a few minutes late tonight or this evening. Really appreciate 3 wonderful panelists sharing your insights with us today. And thank you all in the audience for joining us today. We will continue this conversation, and we will have the recording available on our website and for you to check out. Thank you again for all of you, and to be continued. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.